welcome to Chore Chapters, because everyday tasks need good company. I'm Leo, and with me as always, we have got Luna.
Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today we've got a thrilling and interesting story lined up, so grab your headphones and let's dive straight into the story.
Some events, they seem wrapped up fast, but the ripples just keep spreading. Today, we're doing a deep dive into one of those, the 1963 kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating case. We've looked at news reports from the time, historical accounts, some legal docs, even a blog post, actually, about solved cold cases. And what's striking is, okay, Frank Jr. got back safe. The kidnappers were caught really quickly.
Right. Seems like case closed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the aftermath, that went on for years. It even changed some legal stuff, believe it or not.
Okay, so that's our mission today then. Let's unpack the kidnapping itself, what happened right after, and then track down these unexpected consequences, especially thinking about those Son of Sam laws and how the media narrative really took hold.
Sounds good.
All right, let's start at the beginning. December 8th, 1963, Lake Tahoe. What exactly went down?
It was at Harrah's Casino. Frank Sinatra Jr., he was only 19 then, just starting his own music career.
Trying to follow in his dad's footsteps.
Right. He was in his hotel room, and these guys abducted him. Blindfolded, gunpoint, the whole thing.
Terrifying. Just awful. What did they want? Was it just money?
Yeah, money. They demanded $240,000 for ransom.
Okay, $240,000. I mean, for Sinatra Sr., that's obviously achievable, but still a huge sum back then.
Definitely. The sources don't really say why that specific number, but yeah, that was the demand.
And Sinatra Sr., I mean, you can only imagine. How did he react? What did he do?
Well, obviously, he was incredibly worried. The FBI got involved fast, and they told him, look, pay the ransom.
Yeah.
Cooperate.
Just pay it.
Pay it, but let us track the money. They wanted to record all the serial numbers on the bills. Standard procedure, really, to follow the cash.
Makes sense. And I remember reading something about dimes, that he started carrying dimes all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Because the kidnappers would only contact him through payphones. So Sinatra Sr. had to make sure he always had a pocket full of dimes to answer those calls immediately. No fumbling for change.
Wow. And that became like a lifelong habit for him, right?
Apparently so. That's one of those strange little details. But thankfully, the main thing is Frank Jr. was released. Just 2 days later, December 11th, they let him go in Canoga Park.
2 days. That must have felt like an eternity, but still relatively quick resolution for the kidnapping part. So relief all around, I imagine.
Massive relief, yeah.
So, okay, Frank Jr. is safe. What about catching the guys who did it? You said that happened quickly, too.
Amazingly quickly. Get this. The FBI was mobilized within 40 minutes of the kidnapping being reported that night on December 8th.
40 minutes. That's incredibly fast response.
It really is. They contacted Frank Sr. in Reno, Nancy Sinatra in Bel Air almost immediately. They had a plan right away.
So how did they actually find them so fast? Was it the money trail?
Not directly, no. It was actually kind of an inside break. One of the kidnappers, a guy named John Irwin, he confessed the whole thing to his brother.
He told his brother. Wow.
Yep. And the brother did the right thing, went straight to the FBI in San Diego. And based on that, boom. Barry Keenan, Joe Amsler, and John Irwin were all arrested by December 14th.
So just 3 days after Frank Jr. was released. That's incredibly efficient.
It really was. A confession from inside the group itself is a huge break.
Was there anything else, any other evidence tying them definitively?
Oh, yeah. The FBI found a letter. Barry Keenan had actually pre-written a confession letter and stashed it in a safe deposit box.
He wrote a confession before they even got caught.
Seems like it. And that letter became pretty important later during the trial, especially given the defense they tried to pull.
Ah, right, the trial. Because the defense didn't just say they didn't do it, did they? They had this whole other angle.
Well, completely different. Their lawyer, Gladys Root, she argued the entire kidnapping was faked. A publicity stunt.
A publicity stunt. Orchestrated by Frank Sinatra Jr. himself.
That was the claim. To get attention, boost his career.
Yeah. That is bold. I mean, considering he was held at gunpoint, how did the Sinatras react to that?
Oh, they were furious. Outraged. Frank Sr. actually wrote this incredibly emotional letter to a priest, Father Roger Schmidt. He called the hoax defense another crime against society.
Wow.
Yeah, he talked about how much pain it caused his family, how it basically put Frank Jr. on trial, unfairly casting suspicion on him. You can really feel the anger and hurt in his words.
I bet. And the FBI, what did they say about this hoax theory? especially with that confession letter from Keenan.
The FBI was clear. They had strong evidence to the contrary. That pre-written confession was obviously a key piece of that. The jury didn't buy the hoax defense either.
Right. It seems like a tough sell, honestly, with that kind of evidence.
Very tough. So Keenan, Amsler, and Irwin were all found guilty.
And the sentences, were they harsh, given the high-profile nature?
Initially, yes.
Yeah.
Very harsh. Keenan and Amsler got convicted on all 6 counts, including the abduction at gunpoint. The sentence was life plus 75 years.
Life plus 75, okay.
And Irwin, convicted on 5 counts, got 75 years.
So that seems pretty final. Case closed, long sentences, but I feel like there's a but coming.
There is indeed a but. It turns out there were some legal complications later on. Amsler and Irwin appealed.
Okay. On what grounds?
It was based on procedural errors during the first trial. This is the Amsler v. United States case in 1967. The appeals court found that, basically, their trial hadn't followed all the rules for a potential capital case.
What kind of rules?
Things like not getting lists of potential jurors, the veneermen and witnesses beforehand. That makes it hard to prepare a defense, you know?
Right. You need to know who might be called.
Exactly. And they also didn't get enough peremptory challenges. Those are the ones where you can dismiss a potential juror without giving a reason. They only got 10 together, plus 1 each individually.
And they should have had more.
Yeah, the standard for cases where the death penalty was possible, even if not sought, was 20. So the court said, nope, procedural errors here, convictions overturned, sent back for retrial.
Huh. Okay. What about Keenan? Did he appeal too?
He started an appeal, but then actually asked for it to be dismissed.
So Amsler and Irwin's convictions were overturned. Did they get retried? What actually happened? Did they end up serving those huge sentences?
Not even close.
Yeah.
Keenan, even without the successful appeal, got out around 1968, after about 4.5 years.
4.5 years. From life plus 75. How?
It was based on a finding that he was legally insane at the time he committed the crime.
Ah, okay. And Amsler and Irwin.
They also served way less time, something like 3.5 to maybe just under 4 years total. The sources aren't super detailed on the specifics of retrials or plea deals, but the outcome was clear. Much, much shorter sentences.
That is a really dramatic difference. What about the lawyer, Gladys Root, the one who pushed the hoax defense? Any fallout for her?
There was, initially. She and another lawyer, George Ford, were actually indicted. Federal charges, conspiracy, suborning perjury, obstruction of justice,
Yeah.
basically related to pushing that fake kidnapping story.
So they went after the lawyers, too.
They did. The charges got dismissed at first, but they kept pursuing Root. Eventually, though, all the charges against her were dropped in 1968. But yeah, the legal mess spread out quite a bit.
It really sounds like it. Okay, now, there's another name that always seems to pop up with this story. Dean Torrance. From Jan and Dean, the singers.
Right, Jan and Dean, big surf rock duo back then.
What was his connection? Or alleged connection?
Well, this part is kind of murky, lots of rumors. Joe Amsler, one of the kidnappers, testified that Keenan told him Dean Torrance was the money guy, the financier behind the whole plot.
The financier. Wow. Was there any proof of that?
Well, the complicating factor was that Torrance and Keenan's actually shared a safety deposit box. And guess what they found in it?
Let me guess. Ransom money.
Bingo. Some of the ransom money was found right there in their shared box.
Okay, that doesn't look good. What did Torrance say about that?
He admitted they shared the box, said it was Keenan's idea. But he swore he had no idea about the kidnapping beforehand and no idea the money was in there at that time.
So he denied knowing anything about the crime itself.
Vehemently. He testified in court, denied any advance knowledge, denied putting up any money. He even said he'd loaned Keenan money before just so the guy could eat.
So, was he ever charged, despite the testimony and the money in the box?
No, he was never formally charged with anything related to the kidnapping. But the allegations alone really hurt Jan and Dean's career.
How so?
They apparently lost a TV pilot they were working on, something called Surf Scene, and they got kicked out of roles in a movie, Ride the Wild Surf. All because of Dean's association with the case.
Even though he wasn't charged?
Right. Ironically, their record sales actually spiked during the trial because of all the publicity, the notoriety.
That's wild.
There's also this persistent story that Frank Sinatra Jr. himself essentially blacklisted them in the industry, gave them the horns, as the saying goes.
Ostracized them. Wow. It really shows how even just being linked to something like this, true or not, can have huge consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially when you're in the public eye like that.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. We mentioned at the start this connection to Son of Sam laws. How does that fit into this whole story?
Right. This is where the really long-term legal echo of the kidnapping comes in. Years later, long after the kidnapping and the initial trials, Frank Sinatra Jr. actually sued Barry Keenan
Sued him? For what?
to stop Keenan from making money by telling his story about the kidnapping. Sinatra Jr. invoked California's son of Sam law.
Okay, maybe just briefly explain for listeners, what's the idea behind a son of Sam law?
Sure. The basic idea is to prevent criminals from profiting from their crimes, getting book deals, movie rights, that kind of thing, because of the notoriety of what they did.
Yeah.
The name comes from David Berkowitz, the son of Sam killer in New York.
Got it. So keep criminals from cashing in on their crimes. Makes intuitive sense. Sinatra Jr. tries to use this against Keenan. How did that turn out?
Well, it went all the way up to the California Supreme Court. The case was Keenan v. Superior Court, with Sinatra Jr. as the real party in interest, back in 2002.
And what did the court decide?
They actually struck down part of California's son of Sam law as unconstitutional.
They struck it down. Why?
They relied heavily on a U.S. Supreme Court case, Simon & Schuster, which had invalidated a similar New York law. The reasoning was basically about free speech.
How does free speech come into it?
The court said these laws were too broad. They acted as a financial penalty based on the content of the speech. California's law would seize all the money from any expressive work, a book, a movie, whatever, if it substantially talked about the creator's past crimes.
Even if the book wasn't just about the crime.
Exactly. Even if the crime was just part of a larger story or autobiography. The court said, look, preventing criminals from profiting and helping victims are important goals, yes. But this law wasn't narrow enough. It restricted protected speech too much.
So it was seen as going too far, infringing on First Amendment rights.
Pretty much. It was considered an over-inclusive, content-based restriction on speech. So ironically, this kidnapping case ended up becoming a really important precedent in defining the limits of these son of Sam laws.
That's a really unexpected legal legacy from a 1963 kidnapping.
Absolutely. It highlights that constant tension, doesn't it, between victims' rights, state interests, and fundamental rights like freedom of expression. The court basically drew a line there.
It's fascinating how these things connect.
Yeah.
So thinking about the longer term, beyond the legal stuff, what was the lasting impact on the people involved, and maybe more broadly?
Well, for Frank Sinatra Jr., it seems like the kidnapping, and maybe especially that whole hoax accusation, really stuck with him. He reportedly felt it was a stain on him, something that negatively affected his career, his life.
You can understand that, being accused of faking your own kidnapping.
Yeah, it's rough. Barry Keenan, interestingly, after getting out of prison relatively early, apparently became a pretty successful real estate developer.
Wow, quite a turnaround.
Yeah. Joe Amsler, another kidnapper, reports say he worked as a stunt double, also as a farmhand at times. John Irwin's life after prison seems less documented, at least in the sources we looked at.
And looking at the bigger picture, what does this whole episode tell us?
Well, it definitely shows the intense public fascination, the media frenzy. That happens when celebrities involved in a crime like this.
Sure.
And it's a powerful reminder of how media narratives, even ones later disproven, like the hoax theory, can really take root and cause lasting damage. They shape public perception in ways that are hard to undo.
That hoax idea really did linger, didn't it?
It did. And as we saw with the appeals and the procedural issues, the case also kind of reflects how our legal system evolves, how defendants' rights and the rules of trial procedure are constantly being examined and refined.
So yeah, the Frank Sinatra Jr. kidnapping wasn't just some quick, sensational crime story from the 60s. It's got layers, legal history, media studies, the weight of public perception.
Exactly. Much deeper and more far-reaching than it might seem at first glance.
It really makes you think. Here's something to chew on. Considering that hoax defense and the harm it caused, how much do you think unsubstantiated stories, especially in really high-profile cases, still shape how we see things today? And how much do they still impact the lives involved decades later, especially now with social media amplifying everything?
That's a really important question. The power of narrative is immense.
Definitely something worth considering. And we'd encourage you, if you're interested, to maybe look more into the history of those Son of Sam laws. That whole debate around victims' rights versus free speech is still very much alive and kicking. Lots to explore there.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out. Until next time, take care and keep your chores company.